Welcome to another episode of Catalyzing Radical Systemic Change, where in my own words, it's all about discovering, mapping, and cross-pollinating the various building blocks towards a planetary civilization ahead. So today's podcast is a very special treat for myself and the distinguished guest that I will unveil in a moment, because I want to invite the listeners that even though if you had a very bumpy, difficult biography, ultimately, if you believe in yourself, you can make it through all the ups and downs like the waves of life. And like always in my podcast, we start with the pivotal moments in the biography. I don't feel like I really want to share more of a preface, because what I find truly fascinating when the two of us got introduced, my guest today is Christian Ray Flores, and he's dialing in from Austin. Me, like most of the times, from Guatemala, where love and life invited me to settle down. Is if by any means I think I had a bumpy biography or a difficult one or a rocky ride, he certainly had. And I'm super curious to unveil that. It's somewhat from refugee to rockstar to changemaker. And this combination I never had. So yeah, I'm somewhat in episode 68 or 69 or 70 because I have so many pre-recorded. And maybe we both start just laughing when you introduce yourself, because it's truly the only podcast that I think we rescheduled 5 or 6 times. So Christian, the floor is yours, and I'm super curious to unveil your soul to the listeners and start with, some of the really pivotal moments in your biography.
Thanks. Thanks, Alistair. And it's true. You're right. I mean, I think both you and I have never rescheduled somebody 5 or 6 times in a row, which means either this is a big mistake or this is like the best thing ever and the forces of evil are conspiring against us. So I'll vote for the second one. All right. So what do we talk about? Where do we start?
Yeah, I think what I find really fascinating is trauma has become somewhat a buzzword, right? Whatever, 20 years ago, nobody talked about trauma. And I mean, just looking in the early stages of your biography, one would say, oh, that guy, he must have so many problems. And for sure you had, and so much trouble. But really just curious,
Yeah.
Where did your life start? What were the circumstances?
Well, it was an unusual story from the beginning because my mom is Russian, she met my dad, who was Chilean, in Russia. They were both in college, 2 different colleges. They met at a party or something, just like things like that go. And they got married. I was born, and literally as a baby, they moved to Chile. When I was a baby, they moved to Chile. And that's when things get weird. It would have been a very basic sort of story of a family living in Chile, of professionals. My dad's an engineer, etc. But they were also very political. So both mom and dad are Marxist. And they, at the time in Chile, it was a very pivotal time. There was a socialist president that was about to be elected, honestly, for the first time in history, where it was not a coup or a change of regime, but it was an actual democratic election that elected a socialist president. And they were literally, when we landed in Chile, I kid you not, I just found out recently that they literally went from the plane to the rally for President Salvador Allende. And they were rallying, and I was there, and I was a baby, right? I don't remember all of it. And then, of course, he was elected. A few years later, he was overthrown by a military junta by this guy called Augusto Pinochet. And that turned the country into upside down, right? It was tens of thousands of people arrested, put in concentration camps. A lot of people got tortured and killed. A lot of people disappeared without a trace. Sting wrote a song about it called They Dance Alone. And we were there in the middle of the whole mess. My dad was in a concentration camp, and we were in hiding for a while. And then he was released, luckily. And at the time when they got released, they can get you back. They can follow you around and like round up all of your friends and get all of you in. So we were lucky ones because there was a refugee facility hosted by the UN that was for basically expats, to keep him out of the violence. And my mom was an expat. So my dad got into the refugee facility under the protection of the UN because of my mom, right? Otherwise, he wouldn't have had that protection. And then basically we we left the country with zero certainty. We got asylum in Germany, in Munich. We spent some time there. My mom was so shell shocked. She wanted to go back to the Soviet Union. It was worse there because we were in this communal apartment, like poverty, right? And then my dad got a contract in Africa. So by age 7, I moved to my third continent in my fourth country, in Mozambique. And it was just got its freedom from Portugal after the colonial powers. And then they just needed exports to professionals to help it rebuild the economy. So my dad was one of those people. They imported expats, essentially. And that was also a fairly Marxist country. I mean, they sort of used the network, apparently. And about a year in, there was a civil war that broke out. So there was guerrilla fighting up in the north, bombings in the capital city, that kind of thing. And it's sort of this very strange existence because it was also super fun as a kid. We traveled all over this tropical country. It was an amazing childhood. But the backdrop was bombings, like literally across the street, there was a bombing. The headquarters of the ANC, the African National Congress, Nelson Mandela's party, and he was still in jail at the time, got bombed by these like Green Beret South African sort of special forces people. And then there was, on one hand, extreme freedom and tropical fruit and all of that stuff, and then food shortages, like certain things. We had like ration cards for rice and for bread and for things like that. Certain things we could only get if we traveled to another country. It was such a poor country, and it was basically starting from zero. So there's a lot of instability almost like embedded throughout my childhood. And then we ended up doing another move back to the Soviet Union. My parents divorced. All of a sudden, I'm raised by a single mom. We have a 1-bedroom apartment, no car. I slept in the kitchen for a few years. And it was horrible. I hated it. I hated the Soviet Union, right? It's just almost like grayscale central, mediocrity central. That was sort of the thing. And then I got my college degree in economics. I got a master's in economics. I was very musical my whole life. So I wanted to do music or this, music or this. And I was like back and forth and back and forth. And the smart people went into academia or business or banking or finance. I was the idiot who went into music, because I was just sort of careless like that, and I just wanted to follow a passion. And I was just lucky enough.
This makes me laugh. So because you're running so quick through your biography, when you remember your early childhood, what did it do with you internally? Because ultimately what I see is a bright, centered, very powerful creature. So what do you think made you not getting grinded under, but rather lifted up by the difficult circumstances? I mean, moving that much around from a Pinochet regime to a civil war in Mozambique to sleeping in the kitchen in the Soviet Union. I mean, what gave you this life force, this remembering of your divine spark maybe in your soul? I'm really just curious before you then jump into the Rockstar part.
Right. The answer to that question is it's a mystery to me fully, but I have theories about it. So I'll share the theories. The theory number one, a functional, high supportive family. That's my theory. Even in the midst of, there was divorce and stuff like that. But when my dad was present, he was my hero. He was warm. He had adventures with me. He was just very present emotionally and physically, right? And my theory that it's a massive deal for fathers to be present with their children. My mom, the most nurturing and supporting person, sacrificial, just essentially laid down her life for me as a single mom and put her interests second, and she just nurtured us. And she was my biggest fan. So I had high self-esteem because of that. That's my theory of the supporting family, nuclear family. Also, my other theory is that you learn anti-fragility through if you choose to do that, or maybe because if you're lucky to do that, right? And basically anti-fragility is that, like, there's fragility, you collapse, you have trauma, you're sort of diminished by trauma. There's almost like a robustness. Nassim Taleb, who coined that term, calls that sort of neutral space robustness. Is like, okay, you have trouble coming your way, you stay standing. And there's this anti-fragility. And fragility is when trouble actually makes you stronger, right? So I think I learned anti-fragility because there was so much back to back to back to back to back stuff that certain things that you learn by the age 40, I learned by age 10, perhaps, And for example, one of them is that there's this illusion that we have of a predictable future, right? And of course, that's ridiculous. No one can predict their future. So if you are divorced from that illusion early on, and nothing is certain, you can actually jump to the place where everything is possible. And that's my theory, I guess, right? My theory is that
I love that you say basically at the same time it's a mystery. Before,
it is. Yeah,
you found your theory from the supportive nuclear family to being very early in your childhood, being thrown into circumstances and that made you robust. What year are we when you decide to become a rock star? Just curious in the context of the crumbling Soviet Union.
Oh, it was literally 90. I wanted to do it like 89, 90. I was already in the showbiz circles. I was trying to get close to showbiz. I was in the entourage. I was friends with some people who were artists, and I just wanted to be in the party, right? I wanted to be next to them because I didn't have any other way of entering that world. And so it was probably 89, 90. I was already in the entourage, in the orbit. I graduated in 91 with a master's, and that's literally the year where the whole thing collapses, right? So everything changes. Like, I don't even understand how Russia didn't go into civil war. I think it's a miracle, right? Because there were some cities, looking back at the time, I didn't know that there were major cities like St. Petersburg who were days away from famine. Like, that's how disruptive the whole thing was, And then, but for me, it was a massive, it was a celebration because I grew up in freedom and I came back now to this high contrast, almost like oppressed, gray mediocrity world in the mid 80s Soviet Union. And I hated it with every fiber of my being. I rebelled against it. I disliked it with every fiber of my being. Entrepreneurship was illegal, or at the very least in the shadows, all these things, right? So when the whole thing falls apart, I'm like, this is it. This is it. Everything changes, right? So it's all opportunity central, right? All of a sudden, from mediocrity central to opportunity
let's reflect on that, because I think what really inspired me to take the podcast when we got introduced is such a unique conjunction, right? I mean, you fly into Chile, Salvador Allende gets thrown over by Pinochet. You end up in Mozambique. You have this wild, very colorful, free childhood. Then you end up in almost like a free zone, right, of mediocrity, where everything seems to be like so stubbornly, predicted by the authorities. Totally. And then everything crumbles down. But it's very interesting that your soul chose to make this a huge opportunity. Can you share maybe, like, what were the stages from you were trying to get on stage to becoming famous to traveling the world, earning a lot of money? Yeah, just really curious to stay with that.
Okay, so I'll dive into that rabbit hole. So I had a really good voice since I was like 4, right? So my mom and dad would have visitors like, Christian, sing for us, sing a song for us. That would be like a performance for house guests. And then when we were in Mozambique, I joined a little Chilean choir. So there was a massive, there's probably 150 families of expats, Chilean expats in Mozambique, helping in all areas. Like we're talking about people running hospitals, agriculture programs, minery. My dad was an engineer. So all our parents were these expats, idealistic. They were there to help the country. A lot of them came actually from the first world and with massive pay cuts, They were like these secular missionaries, right? So it's a very tight community. It's like a village. And then this one lady organized a children's choir. And it was like Latin American classics, Argentina, Colombia, Chile, whatever, Brazil. And it was just, I remember, and this actually, I talk about this with people I coach when I teach them to find their edge, the thing that makes them distinct and unique, is that these are the moments where I remember the first time I felt almost like zero gravity flow when I'm rehearsing with these kids, and I can do it forever. That's how it felt, right? And then because I had a good voice, they gave me some solo parts. So it was very basic, but also interesting thing. So I was at a rally when I was 5. In Mozambique, I literally have a picture of us singing for the president of Mozambique. And this Marxist guy with like Fidel Castro outfit, wannabe. And he was, I have a picture of this president. He was the first president of Mozambique. So we go back to Russia. No one ever thinks it's a career or anything like that, not even close. And I forget about it, but I get into breakdancing. So the 80s, early 80s, breakdancing erupts. And it sort of makes its way like a little, very faint signal across to the Soviet bloc. So it's all smuggled VHS tapes, right? Like no one knows what it is. And I joined, of course, being sort of a rebellious, almost subculture leaning kind of person. I started breakdancing, and we rehearsed in these subterranean sort of places, basically. It's truly a subculture. Maybe there's, I don't know, a couple of hundred for the whole country of the mass of the Soviet Union. So there was a very tight tribe, and I got really good at it. And so I was like, all of a sudden, I can sing, I can dance. And then the clubs start. Before, I kid you not, I'm not exaggerating, Moscow is a massive city. There were maybe 2 clubs that maybe went past midnight in the whole city. It was just nothing, right? As I said, that's how terrible it was. And then the clubs pop up after the 90s. And then all of a sudden there's some sort of better dressed, sharp, intellectual elite doing business deals showing up at these clubs. And because there's only 2 or 3 places in the very beginning that were decent, the best, literally the elite, we know exactly where they are. So if you go to that place and you start meeting people, you're going to get to the top really quickly, very, very quickly. So I was like, and before that I was just playing with my keyboards. I would record these. I had this cassette tape at home. There was no home recording at all. Like to record anything, you have to go to studios. There was like 3 studios in the whole city, right? Maybe. Most of them government owned, like one or 2 in private hands. That's it. So I had like this home thing that was horrible. So I'd record these terrible demos, right, for a while. And I would dance. And then I'm at this party. So then I was like, okay, how do I get into this thing? So I became friends with a couple of people that were in show business. And then they invited me to parties. And I would be in the entourage. Like I have nothing to show. And one of the parties, this guy comes up to me. And I, of course, fake it till you make it. I dressed the part. I looked exotic. I looked sharp. And this guy comes in, are you an artist? You look like an artist. I'm like, yeah. He goes, so I own a studio. And he's like one of the maybe 3 private studios in the whole city. He goes, if I give you some night hours where no one's there, what would you do with that opportunity? And I'm like, look, I'll write some songs, record some. He goes, can you write? I'm like, yeah, I'll write. Who writes the lyrics? I'll write the lyrics. Great. Call me Monday, that kind of thing. Of course, I've never written anything in my life. Right?
So I love it. I really love it. You're such an exotic creature. I think that's why we, even after 5 to 6 times rescheduling, made it, because we also have some striking similarities, because I went from the west of Germany to the east of Germany in 1991 to become a professional ballet dancer. So I know very much that setting of everything crumbling down and the elite meeting. I was way too young for all of that. Yeah. So you really made it from like scratch. When people talk bootstrapped these days in startup environments, I mean, you made it like from nothing. Can you share, like, when was this like like breakthrough moment. So I imagine you record alone during the night, you write the songs, they get published, and then suddenly you get booked and you fly around in the former Soviet Union. I mean, how quickly did that go? I mean, it was a jump from nobody to famous in a very short amount of time, right?
Well, the actual jump, I know exactly when it was, but let me tell you just before that, right? What happened is, so I recorded a few demos. Then it was like, oh, okay, there's something there. I can write a song that's pretty good. Still very mediocre, but for me, pretty good. There was professional recording. So I recruited some. I'm like, okay, I had an early sensitivity about uniqueness and brand, partially because I think of my background in creativity in general, partially because of an economics major, and I understood, certain things about free markets, right? So I'm like, I'm going to build a brand, basically. And that's why, part of the reason I coach now in brand development is that it was like in my blood, right, early on. So I recruited some dancers. None of them knew how to do actual show business stuff. It's break dancers. They're all street dancers. So I had to teach them how to dance in sync with each other. I choreographed things that are beyond just break dancing myself. I literally taught my dancers how to do those things, choreographed every number. And I basically had 3 songs ready and 3 numbers, full show business, right? Full choreography, costumes, everything. We rehearsed those 3 numbers for 6 months before we showed anything to anybody. And it was that level of excellence and distinction and understanding of okay, this needs to be undeniable, basically. That was sort of my philosophy. So, and it was all, I was in my 20s, so it was all instinctive, really. Maybe. I was obsessed over show business, so I read a lot of biographies and books. So all of that was sort of in my brain. So then we had these 3 numbers ready, and there was this big club called Jump, and it was basically looked like a flying saucer in the Olympic Village from the 80s, and it was where the tennis courts were. And so there's a big area, and they had it probably held 500-600 people, maybe a little bit more. They had a big stage, and it was the place. There's maybe 2 in the whole city. So we went and auditioned there. And I got a manager who was like a bass guitar player who wanted to be a manager, type manager. So, and they auditioned us once. They hired us on the spot. And we did 4 or 5 dates a week for 6 months of the same songs.
I need to laugh again. Okay, amazing. 3 songs, the whole choreography, everything from scratch at Jump in Moscow. And what happened then? Because
what happened then, it accelerates because all of the elite are going to 2 or 3 spots in the whole city. So imagine big country. All the people that decide everything are in one city. All the people that are in one city go to 2 or 3 places. I'm on stage in those places. So immediately word spreads. I'm distinct. I'm everybody loves it, right? It's Western sounding. It's R&B and pop. It's dance. No one moved like that, at the time. So it becomes a chain reaction. And so by the end of 93, people were offering me record contracts. And one of the people that were one of the brands that were record companies was Polygram. Polygram was an international brand, and they had sort of a local sort of branch. So Polygram was offering, and they said, if you consider our bid to sign you, we will put you in the New Year's Eve show. The New Year's show was imagine if Christmas, 4th of July, whatever else in America was combined in one day. Super Bowl.
Plus Super Bowl.
Final, yeah, Super Bowl, exactly. One day. And the whole country, not just one Russia, it's 15 countries, the ex-Soviet Union, they celebrate that day by eating a lot of food, drinking a lot of vodka, and watching a show on TV. That's the show that literally everybody watches.
And you're right in the middle of it.
And they put me in, and I haven't even signed the contract. I ended up not signing with them, but they said they were sweetening the deal. They were incentivizing. That's how much they wanted me. So I'm on that show. I recorded maybe a month ahead or something like that. And it was such a new wave because they recorded on, at the time, it was such a high end sort of thing that I remember they got like this elite film director and they recorded on 35 millimeter Kodak, the whole thing. It was that big of a deal. And then it airs at the end of 1993, January 1st, I wake up famous. That's how quick it was. And then of course there's more.
Amazing. So let's tie that back, because ultimately, as you know, my whole show is about systemic change.
Yeah.
So let's jumpstart a little, because I had that as well myself. And I know so many like famous people. So imagine, okay, you earn a lot of money, you're single, groupie, sex, drugs, and rock and roll kind of thing, right?
Sure.
I don't want to dive too much into that. When was, to end that chapter of the pivotal moments in your biography, when was this first nagging feeling like this is not enough, or there's something in your soul, even though you have all the money and the hottest chicks on the planet, you know, and you're traveling around and you're dining in fancy and sleeping in fancy 5-star hotels, where something at the core of who you are, some say the soul, right, tells you this can't be it. When was that? Do you remember that moment?
I do. Yeah, I do. Yeah. I was on a train going on tour. Most of my, I at the time already traveled with like 20, 21 people. And they were all somewhere else. I think they were like in the restaurant car or something. So I was alone in the compartment, sleeper car type thing. And then I'm looking out, and I think I was having a cup of tea, and I remember going, is this all there is for me? Basically, it was like this very distinct thought that was scary, because I go, how can you possibly be dissatisfied, right? You're living the dream that most musicians will never live, you know, and yet there was something inside of me very true that said that can't be it, right? And basically, eventually, obviously, I unpacked it, like I just dug in and figured out what it was, and basically what it was is that, you know, at the time, I felt it. I know it sounds very paradoxical and perhaps maybe ungrateful, right? But I felt claustrophobic in the space, both geographically, because I was this world citizen guy who spoke 4 different languages, right? So all I am is traveling from one Russian-speaking place to another. Like, and at the time that included Ukraine, the Baltics, all those places, and you know, it was just. Can I see myself? Is it fun? Absolutely. Can I see myself doing it for another 20 years? That was a depressing thought for me. The other thing was almost like there was parts of me that were dormant, and I knew that, because yes, I was having some success in music and everything, but I have an economics degree. I speak languages. I want to do charity work. I was sort of got into this whole, I was inspired by We Are the World and Live Aid. And it spoke to my heart, because I grew up in some of the poorest places on earth, to do something for the poor. And I couldn't do that. At the time, I couldn't do it easily in the space that I was in. And I wanted to actually learn how to do it and everything. And I already was doing work with orphans in Moscow and things like that. And then the other piece was, I wanted to do spiritual work. I became a Christian. I wanted to dedicate myself to ministry work as well. And there was another layer, which is family. And I would say maybe that was probably number 1, number 2 at the time, because I realized I come from 3 generations of broken homes. And the worst trauma of my life was losing. I dated this supermodel, which was like the cliche thing to do at the time. And she broke up with me because I was a mean jerk, and I was a mean jerk because I would sabotage every relationship I was in, because my parents divorced, and it hurt me so deeply that I didn't want to repeat that, be part of that, any of that. So at the time I was already beyond that, going, I need to learn how to build a family. No one taught me. 3 generations of broken homes. This is actually more important to me than, let's say, a music career, right? And for that, I know I need to be stable somewhere. And especially when I have kids, I need to be present with my kids, etc. So anyway, there are layers to the realization. And I think ultimately, I don't know what it is, but I think there was definitely some part of me that is so creative, and this is paradoxical again, that I realized that creative field, everything is creative. You can be creative anywhere. In that creative field, I have 10 years, maybe 15 years of hits, and then maybe another 20, 30 years of a very sort of, successful, well-paid nostalgia tour. And I didn't want to do a nostalgia tour. I didn't want to do 20 years later songs that I wrote when I was 25.
Then
So maybe there's
let's
an
try
ego
to
part.
no, let's try to wrap that up, because what I find very interesting is some people fall off the cliff on the peak of their career,
Yeah.
and some fall from the cliff from the bottom. And you're one
Yeah.
of those who basically segued into a completely new, again, country, again,
Yeah.
new career, being at the very peak. I feel I want to segue or paraphrase the next chapter slightly different. So, because I know despite being an artist, you're also very well versed as an entrepreneur. I love a theory of change as a paradigmatic, let's say maybe North Star, where you're ultimately very clear from a legacy perspective, and from this short lifespan we're granted, from God, the universe, the creator, the creatrix. So when you were segueing into your entrepreneurial journey, was there very early on, because you mentioned and sprinkled in some details, charity work, like a devoted Christian, that informed your entrepreneurial journey? Like, meaning from that point where you realized, okay, I don't want to go nostalgic, I don't want to repeat the same songs for the next 25 years. What was the jump again into that
I think so. Yeah, I think it was the dissatisfaction of that trajectory for me. I projected it forward, and there was no guarantee that actually I was right or wrong. It was just, for me, what mattered is I wanted to create continuously for an extended period of time, innovate continuously. And I think a lot of it was instinctive. It wasn't really rational. It was really more of a, I want to feel fully alive. I don't want to be trapped in a place where just to make even a good living, I have to not be creative. I'm sort of, hostage of this thing that I developed. So that's what happened.
From that pivotal moment, Christian, when you realized, okay, you don't want to just travel in the former Soviet Union and keep on repeating the same old songs, to again jumping into the unknown. Like, how do I imagine these pieces lining up? When you again end up in a new country, you again start from scratch. How do I imagine you have done that, and what inspired you? What gave you the strength to start from scratch again?
Well, it was not it was not really super thought through, but the strength, I think, the anti-fragility was there. And basically what happened is I spent a couple of years, I did ministry work, charity work. We did these big events for orphans in Russia. I was still doing music. I phased out very slowly. But my heart was there, right? And it was just incredibly beautiful for me at the peak. And the irony of what inspired me, the people that inspired me go into music. One of them was this guy, Michael Jackson. He's one of the biggest stars ever in history, actually, still. And he inspired me. And it was through my charity work that I got in contact with him. We did this big event, and Hail Mary, maybe he'll come. But it was like 3,000 orphans. He was touring. We timed an event to his coming, and he came. And it was truly mind-boggling to be in his presence, because this was somebody who's in the stratosphere. And then as a bonus, as a very strange bonus, okay, two bonuses. One, I was supposed to perform. I always performed. I had like the celebrity part of the event for orphans, and they loved it. I brought my celebrity friends. We had a performance. So then I realized I was there. Michael Jackson's there, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I'm supposed to go on stage in 15 minutes, and he's in the room, and it just horrified me. And I was like petrified. I'm like, I'm not going to offend him with my lowly art. And he left right before I came on, and I was so happy. In hindsight, it was all very strange, right? But then the other bonus is that they loved us so much. This how organized everything was. They needed extras on stage for his big show. It's a stadium show, and they needed some older women, like 3 or 4. And my mom ended up being an extra, and she was on stage with Michael Jackson in front of 100,000 people during his show, which was like, who would have thought ever, that something like that was possible. So anyway, that's just a side note. I married an American. My wife, Deb, came to Russia to be with me. All of our 3 daughters, including the daughter that was born before we were married to her, so we had 2 daughters together. They were all born in Russia. And then Deb speaks Russian. She's fluent. We wanted to stay there, but her health started deteriorating because of the climate there. So the decision to move was really not a visionary decision. It was really more of a family decision. And we moved, and I had to basically start over. And no one knows who I am here. No one cares who I am here. It's one of those things. And in the beginning, it was definitely made me very insecure. I didn't. I felt like I'm an immigrant. I look different. I have an accent. What are the odds, right? And
well, the accent I don't really get.
Eventually,
but maybe in that we're also very similar.
It slowly faded. It faded slowly because I've been here for 20 years and I'm married to an American. So obviously my language evolved. And of course, I've been a public speaker for 20 years here. So it helps, obviously. But at the time, you could tell more. People can still sense an accent. But at the time, it was more pronounced.
Then I'm curious. I want to let's jump timelines. Let's not stick to the biography, right? So what I find very interesting is if I were to see a soul, right, it's a wild, adventurous life, right? But ultimately, you're very committed to your values and not only making money, but inspiring others, helping them to fulfill their purpose. You're in high performance leadership, coaching positions. You built multiple companies. You're still somewhat adjacent to, let's say, the industry that chose you, since earliest childhood, being that talented singer. When we jump into the now time, what inspires you most when you get up to work? And when you think about the future generations, like meaning your own children, but you jump a couple of generations, you look like maybe 50 years in the future or 100 years in the future. Mm-hmm. What are these sparkles in the souls of these other human beings that you help that, you want to help light up or find their purpose or find their true meaning, their true self? I'm curious to stay more in the now moment. So can you sketch, when I imagine like an average week, like what do you do? What are your foci in, like, the plural of focus? What are your foci that, make you the human being that you are and contribute?
That's a great question, man. Let's say today I spend time with people I love and who I want to serve. That's a big deal. I have a lot of freedom when it comes to time and geography. So I am there for my children. I'm there for my wife, like literally there, physically there. We're still in the same city. They're actually here now because one of them is going through a breakup. So the family unites around the person that's going through a breakup. So we watch movies, we do this, we do that. So I think that's still a priority. I think it's been a priority for 20 years. I basically decided I'm going to forego glory for the sake of glory, fame for the sake of fame. Like, even if it comes knocking on my door and if it compromises my relationship with my wife and my children, it's a no-go. I've already tasted it. I don't know that it's not all that it's, hyped up to be. So that's one thing. I take care of my health. I'm 56 years old. I'm healthy. Nothing hurts at all. So I walk a lot. I contemplate. I journal. I lift weights. I'm in a place that's very natural. So there's trails and deer and creeks and things like that. So I'm exposed to a lot of beauty literally every single day. And I love creating. So creating is a big deal. The creative process is still as relevant to me now as it was, when I was 25. So I write maybe 2 hours a day. And it's usually either content for my coaching program or for my YouTube channel and podcast. Or if I'm writing a book, which I released a book in last December, I do that. But it's basically this completely uncompromised 2 hours of pure creativity every single day. And that's just part of the creative work. It's just the beginning. So to me, that's just really makes me happy. And I would say the people the thing that I focus on now more than anything, because I can, I think if life God gave you gifts and maybe skills right over time that you accumulate. I think most people that I coach, it's not that they don't know what to do. They have too much choices of what to do. So they dabble and they don't decide, okay, here's what I'm going to be known for. Right. And it's the same thing with me. I have a digital media company. I love creative work with, branding and strategy, things like that. But I love creative work with branding and strategy and things like that more applied to people than applied to companies and tech startups, for example. I can do it, but it doesn't make me feel fully alive. So
what I feel is a multipreneur that lives around a conscious everyday life, which very much resonates.
Yeah. Yes.
And
yes,
the high degree of freedom and choosing the clients that you want to work with instead of like chasing money and fame. From our preparation at the very beginning of rescheduling 5 times, one thing stood out that I sense is the core of your theory of change, which is culture is sticky. There's this very, very, very famous quote from Peter Drucker that says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So I wonder when you apply your skill sets in the arena of coaching, of brand building, more with a focus on individuals than like, let's say, tech startups. What's your secret sauce? When culture is sticky, ultimately, what's the, let's say, USP, the unique value proposition you're providing to your clients?
Oh, I'm so glad you said that, because I can talk about it for hours. And literally on a macro level, I can geek out on Soviet culture, post-Soviet culture, even the things that are happening in Ukraine and Russia right now. I can dissect that from a cultural perspective that will explain more than people could explain from the standpoint of political alliances or economics, honestly. So obviously culture is a big deal for me. And I think for me on a micro level, on a granular level, culture is what you think without thinking, how you see the world without thinking, what you do without thinking. That's culture. That's baseline. And to me, I get really excited because we do all kinds of things on autopilot that makes us functional, successful human beings, right? Everything from driving a car without thinking, it's all autopilot stuff. It's all hardwired here through repetition, all the way through brain surgery. A brain surgeon, a lot of it might be scary on the surface, but a lot of what he does is accumulated wisdom and skill and mastery. So he doesn't actually have to think. A lot of it is instinctual. We also fail on autopilot. So our culture fails us also on autopilot. which basically means if you have limiting beliefs about yourself, about the world you live in, about money, about business, power, sex, marriage, culture, friendships, relationships, parenting, if you have flawed autopilots in those areas, you are failing on autopilot. And one of my favorite things to do is to reprogram the failed autopilots of the world.
Let's stay there. I love it. I love it. That's okay. The secret sauce.
To truly unpack. Yes, that's the secret sauce. The secret sauce.
It's very interesting. You're the first guest ever on my show. And I forgot, I'm round about now 70 episodes in, maybe you're 68, 69. I have so many pre-recorded. When I use autopilot, it's exactly how you use it. Most of our lives are actually unconscious. These are all the patterns we take up from early childhood, from our family programming, from the cultural programming, from the different languages, from the subsettings and the industries that we're working in. So I wonder, is there a specific toolbox that you access? How do I imagine do you work when I try to say, okay, you're roughly doing consulting and advisory on the one hand, and on the other hand, you're doing coaching?
Well, the main focal point for me, and it's a great focal point, and it took me 3 years to land even on that focal point, is developing a personal brand, right? What is that exactly? It's not just a buzzword. A personal brand has always existed in the history of the world. It's a buzzword now, and it is technologically and sort of culturally the most advantageous thing you can do to serve people in more places now, right? That's true. So it's not just a buzzword. It's the best time to be alive and have a personal brand. But really, in its essence, is knowing who you are, knowing what you do best, and serving more people with the things that you do best. That's a personal brand. Being known for that, having a reputation, digital, amplified, leverage that, the power of personal brand for more people to know how you can serve people. That's it. What kind of problem do you solve? Who is the person you solve? What's the process you take them through? What's the timeline? And what's the promise, right? That's a personal brand. So I help people shape those things, but behind that thing, which everybody wants, it's not even about money or business or fame or impact. It's about serving humanity. It's about mattering. It's the most primal thing we have. We want to matter. That's why when people get rich and they didn't earn it, it makes them miserable. But when they get rich and they earned it, it makes them happy, right? So the process that I take them through is I usually do 3 months. It's called a core, and it's like pillar stuff, right? And in the pillar stuff, we start with the fuel. What fuels you? And usually we'll run on all kinds of diluted, mixed, and low-quality fuels. And what we want to do is purify those things, right? It's the motivation that we have. Are we fueled by anxiety and stress and burnout, envy, jealousy, from sort of daily things to deeper things, right? Can you go from anxious to creative in an hour? And I can teach you that in a week. It's how to go from anxious, you had bad news, you're in a bad mood, you didn't get enough sleep, you have some, disgruntled client, or your boss is an idiot, whatever, right? Or your kids are disrespectful. How do you go from that to creative? Because being creative is your natural state. And if you're anxious all the time, which half of America is anxious all the time, then you can't create. You just can't create. The fuel.
Not only half of America. I would say half of the civilized world, which is one of the things that fascinates me so much. Having spent the last 5 years,
crazy, yeah.
Primarily not in Europe.
Yeah. So.
Because
right, so you probably have a contrast of people not being stressed out at such high
the
levels,
opposite,
right?
In all of Latin America is a very, very famous quote that I think binds the whole podcast together, and it really says "se sufre, pero se goza," which literally translates into
"se goza."
it's
It's suffer,
hardship,
but you enjoy. Yeah.
but you enjoy it. So there's something very unique to this like Western civilized welfare state
Yeah. Yeah.
nations where you just have too much time, you know, to simmer in your own sauce and complain instead of there
Yeah.
is no choice. You need to find yourself quickly again, you know, in your language. Be creative, be the author, be the creator of your own biography. To bind that all
Yeah.
together,
Exactly.
if you were to try to convey a couple of messages, and then people can reach out directly to you via the show notes. If you were to summarize, I think you're at an age, so you're 10 years older than me, pretty exactly 10 years older, but have accumulated a lot of wisdom in your life. Is what would be the main takeaways from this podcast for listeners, especially when they're facing difficult circumstances? What would you recommend them to do?
Well, I would say is it's all about reframing, right? Everything. And I think maybe I'll follow my instincts and my intuition here from your question. You said you accumulated a lot of wisdom. I have, and I've sought it out. And I think seeking wisdom is probably the best thing you can possibly do in life. And if you think about sort of the progression of, and also it's the best way to compete in the marketplace and have value, because you go from, let's say, ignorance. Ignorance is the absence of information, right? You don't know. Information is the presence of information. Knowledge is the acceptance of information as a real thing. Wisdom is the ability to use this knowledge and apply it to real life. That's what I think wisdom is. And I would say the best possible thing you can do is sort of stay in that continuum and seek wisdom, because we went from, people being stuck in the brute force, their commodified labor kind of people, right? To the information age where you hold some information that you have inherent value. But now information is commodified as well. Information is completely free. It's not valuable at all. It's like the air we breathe. But even knowledge is being commodified. So AI is going to eliminate millions of jobs that are white collar jobs, like lawyers, accountants, all kinds of, like millions and millions. We don't need as many people like that anymore. And it's going to accelerate. The one thing that AI cannot replace is wisdom. It cannot. As a matter of fact, wisdom is going to decrease in probability, because if I can ask ChatGPT, hey, I had just had a fight with my wife. ChatGPT tells me what the answer is, and I go talk to her, and she will ask me, did you ask ChatGPT about it? I say yes. What's the value of my response to her? It's zero.
Yeah,
So
I love
going to
it.
be a lot of people that get weakened by ChatGPT, but by access to information. But what ChatGPT cannot give you, any AI, is wisdom.
Yeah,
That
I
is
could
the
not agree
premium
more.
value you can have and present to the world.
I could not agree more. Yeah, isn't it interesting? Because moving into that new house, I can't show it on my podcast. It was one of my dreams since literally 25 years to have one room that's only dedicated to meditation and prayer. So it's almost, I'm sitting in a chapel in a very old house in a UNESCO World Heritage town that was the first town that the Spaniards built when they conquered Middle America, you know? So yeah. I'm living in a very old house and recording this in a chapel. And I've never shared this, but what I find very interesting is, and this is maybe with different flavors, I think what makes me the human being that I am, beyond just the fancy tattoos, if some of the listeners tune in via video, is really the dedication to my practice. And the dedication to my practice is contemplation, it's prayer, it's meditation every day. Minus, okay, you're super sick or you're in the middle of a, intercontinental travel. But even, I would say, in the airport, and whilst in the plane, you can like meditate and pray or journal. So I think for me, what really inspired me to take this podcast with you is you are the creator. Like you, the listener, you are ultimately the creator of your life circumstances, with few exceptions, right? Okay, if you get incarcerated,
Absolutely.
In a coup d'etat, okay, your degrees of freedom are way smaller. But generally speaking, most of us are on autopilot mode, not that often aware that we're actually really every day, every minute, every hour, every day, every week, we're creating that which we want to be. And we need to take utterly responsibility for our life circumstances. So this makes me feel and sense you on a very profound level. Maybe the last words for today. When people have a very difficult life situation, which I know we both had, so you're broke, you're divorced, and you're in a new country, what would be the first recommendation? So they can't pay me, they can't pay you, they can't enroll to a program. When you're rock bottom, right? What would be a recommendation to those, what's the first step, or time and again, the first steps in these very difficult life circumstances that give you the power
Well, I
back?
think for me, yeah. I mean, I was at the peak of my career, and I was clinically depressed when I lost my daughter. My ex-girlfriend cut me off, and I will tell everybody what happened to me. And I sought ancient wisdom. I started reading the Bible. I was very critical and arrogant before that, and I started praying. And that's the first step, because what you realize is there's a higher power above you that is both intelligent, benevolent, and loves you personally. That one thing, if you not only think it but actually experience it and feel it, will start getting you back on the path to flourishing, in my opinion. That would be the first step, and that's all free. You don't have to pay a consultant. It's all free, And you can sign up to my newsletter, and that's also free.
Let's
in which I will tell you this is the first step you take.
let's end the podcast from my side with sharing a story that I don't think I've ever unveiled. So when my ballet career crumbled at a different age, so I started at 7, it ended at 20, and it put me into a very depressed state for many years. And my mom was totally overwhelmed, and my dad was spot on. You know what he did? He paired me up with a Benedictine monk that built actually the biggest retreat center in Europe. So the mala I'm wearing, it's not one of these fancy malas just because they became fashionable. I ultimately spent 22 years with a Benedictine monk that was also a Zen Buddhist master. So in the darkest days of my late adolescence, where I did not know what to do, where to go, what to study, what did I do? I did Christian contemplation. So it's very interesting that there is something in between the two of our biographies, and I have the Lord's Prayer tattooed. Who's a motherfucker who gets the Lord's Prayer tattooed on the forearm? So, it seems there's a divine sparkle connecting us, through time and space, through the podcast, and wanting to inspire people. Yeah. Christian.
Interesting. That's a great story.
Super grateful for the conversation. If people want to reach out, they can do so via the show notes. Super grateful by your humility. It's an interesting mix of humility and a strong, masculine, caring life force. So yeah, just grateful we had that conversation. And may it inspire others, even if you're rock bottom, to take your first step. And if the first step is meditation, or it's prayer, or going into a church. And I agree, if you're rock bottom and you can't afford things, there are things for free. Sometimes also just reading a book has saved my ass.
Absolutely. 100%. 100%. Thanks, Alistair. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much.